My final guest is Clarkstown Town Assessor John Noto. Welcome, John.
Welcome. Thank you.
So thank you for being our final guest of this episode of Hometown Happenings, and I'd like to maybe just for the benefit of our viewers, you could give a little bit of background about yourself. You know, how long you've been living here in the town, and we'll kind of get into your role as town assessor.
Sure. I grew up in New City, right on Little Tour Road, in a family real estate business, which my parents ran out of the house. They were real estate appraisers, and I kind of got reeled into the appraisal business. So from when I was probably 10 or 12 years old, I was out measuring houses with my folks, and went to school right here in Rockland to St. Thomas Aquinas, got a finance degree, went into the family business, became a partner in the appraisal business, and then got into government as well. I spent 9 years as Director of Real Property Tax Services, and a couple years on the other side, protesting taxes on behalf of companies, and then went to the city of Yonkers as a deputy assessor, and then was fortunate enough to come here as the assessor in Clarkstown.
Right. So for the benefit of our viewers, the Director of Real Property Tax Services, it's kind of an assessor equivalent, and is kind of the resource to all town assessors and village assessors?
Right. You're there as a liaison between the state and the local assessment community, and you're there to guide, counsel, and educate the assessor's office on various different issues, anywhere from valuation to legal matters that assessors may have questions with. With new assessors and new staff members, we would train them. Boards of assessment review, we would train the boards, make sure that they were up to beat on all the different aspects of valuations, so that they would be able to make decisions based on protests that were coming into their hearings.
Right. I don't think our residents realize, and people don't really understand just how involved an assessor's office is, and just how involved assessing is in general as it relates to local government. And again, you just hit on it with the point that as the Director of Real Property Tax Services, I mean, it's a whole position and a whole office over in Rockland County government that's the liaison between the state and all the local towns. And so really you had to be able to know the assessor's job, not just of one town, but pretty much of every town. And you really needed to know what was going on at the state level, and as legislation would change, the role of assessments throughout the state. One of the things I find very interesting is in very many parts of the country, and even in some parts of the state, the assessor is actually an elected position. Down here in this part of the state, it's an appointed position. Could you speak to that? The role of the assessor, just in general. How what's the typical term of an assessor? And how a person becomes qualified to become an assessor.
Sure. To your first point, it used to be a lot of towns, especially upstate, would be elected 3-member boards. They've gotten away from that. Assessing needs to really be almost an independent arm of government, where there's no politics whatsoever involved. We treat every parcel throughout the state the same way and amongst the same laws, with exceptions to some local options that the county or the towns can adopt. It's an important element of being able to make an independent judgment on value and exemptions without having any interference or pressures from the political environment. Assessors are appointed to a 6-year term, county directors as well. They all start and stop at the same time. So the next appointment term will be in October of 19, and that'll start the next term of 6 years. That 6-year term, if you know the political cycle of 2 and 4 years, it outspans that 2 and 4 year term, so it gives that assessor or county director the independence and pressure-free, if you will, environment to just make the best decisions on behalf of the taxpayers.
Mm-hmm. So, and you were appointed early this year by the Clarkstown Town Board to assume the unexpired term of Mr. Shedler. Mr. Shedler had actually assumed the unexpired term of Kathy Conklin, who had been the longtime assessor, and I think that term concludes next year. So obviously you'll be in a position to be reappointed for your own 6-year term going forward. Talk to me a little bit about the role of the assessor's office as it relates to individual property owners, and what, essentially what does the assessor's office do?
So the assessor is charged with maintaining value and establishing value on new properties, new construction, and so forth. Our main function is to provide fairness and equity within the property tax system. What that means is when the various different tax levying bodies levy a tax, that it gets spread out equitably amongst the whole tax base, so that everybody, if you will, pays their fair share, no more, no less. And there's multiple components to that. The assessor is the major component, but what a lot of people don't realize is they're the other component. It's a checks and balances. So we go out and value a property or make sure that our level of assessment is accurate, so that our assessments that were set in Clarkstown in 1985, that they're equalized to today's values by a ratio. And we make sure that ratio is accurate to reflect value, so that properties do pay their fair share. When a property owner looks at their tax bills are very descriptive as to what the assessment is and what their full value is. Their job, if you will, is to be the checks and balances for us. If they see that they're overassessed or they feel their property is valued too high, then their job is to come into on grievance day, fourth Tuesday in May, to contest their assessment so they get it right, so that we can take a look at it. The Board of Assessment Review takes an independent look at it and says yes or no as to the evidence that the taxpayer provides to get that assessment correct.
Mm-hmm. And how many people work in the assessor's office?
We have a staff of 10 total.
Okay. And so what will take place is you have a certain number of them that will actually go out and review properties, and they'll, when there's additions and alterations, can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So with when there's sales, we look at sales reviews to make sure that the data that is out in the public arena is captured to match the data that we have on record, mm-hmm. so that if there's anything missing, that we can pick that up, mm-hmm. and add to the assessment roll. We don't chase sales. We don't look at properties that sell and say we got to bring an assessment up. That's illegal. Mm-hmm. It goes against what's called a welcome new neighbor law. Right. So building permits are a big component of what we look for. So the building department provides us monthly with all the building permits that have been issued and COs. Right. And we go out to look at them, see what additions have been made. If they increase, they add value to that structure, then we are charged by law to pick that up and place that on the assessment roll.
Mm-hmm. And talk to us a little bit about the schedule in the assessor's office. Just take us from January through the end of the year. What's that like? Because the assessor's roll, the official roll has to be adopted by certain dates, and maybe you could just walk us through what takes place.
We'll start in March, because March is what we call taxable status dates. So the assessor looks at all property in their physical condition and their condition of ownership, who owns it as of March 1, and values that product as of the July prior. And then we take that information and we produce our values from that March 1 date until May 1. May 1st is what's called tentative roll date. We produce a tentative roll. When
that's of all properties.
All properties throughout
the entire town.
That's correct. And then
how many parcels are there in Clarkstown?
There's approximately 28,000 and change.
And do you know the breakout? How many are residential? How many are non-residential?
About 92 to 94% of it is residential, and the balance is on our what we call non-homestead. Okay. So 1, 2, and 3 families are in the homestead side.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So May 1, the public can come in and inspect our values and our inventory, and this is where they become a critical component to see that we've got their inventory right and their value right. And the Board of Assessment Review comes in the fourth Tuesday in May, and they hear complaints on assessment, and they make determinations throughout this period we're in right now, and as of July 1, issue notices to all the changes that have happened, all the reductions that have been granted, or the denials if there was no case. Right. So from June 1 to July 1, the taxpayer, July 1 for the next 30 days, they have the opportunity to say, I don't agree with the Board of Assessment Review. I want to take it the next step. And for 1, 2, and 3 family homes that are owner occupied, they can go to small claims assessment review. And then they have another shot with an independent judicial hearing officer to hear their case. It's very informal. A taxpayer can do it without representation from an attorney and have their case heard. And that would be one route to go. If you're in the non-homestead class or you're not owner occupied in the 1, 2, or 3 family, you go to a small claim, a Article 7 hearing, which is like an Article 78 is civil action, but reserved for real property tax matters.
Right.
And from there, we get a final roll in July 1. All the adjustments get made between July and about August, and then we produce an assessment roll for taxation purposes. That is what the school district will be using in September.
Right.
So
it's a pretty involved process. Essentially, from March 1st, until May 1st, and then May 1st when the tentative roll is ready, and then folks had the opportunity to be able to move forward with challenging, their assessment, and then going through small claims for assessments. We call that SCAR. And then ultimately, if they're not happy, they can go even a step further and into an Article 7, which is like a state Supreme Court. So it's fairly involved, plus the day-to-day running of just trying to update and keep the inventory of 28,000 parcels, accurate. How does Clarkstown rank? I know we're the 14th largest in terms of population out of over 930 towns across New York State. So we're one of the more sizable towns. So I think one of the smallest towns is about 40 people up near the Canadian border, and the largest town is 800,000 people out on Long Island. But there's only 13 other towns that are larger than us in all of New York State from population. So as parcel size, 28,000 parcels, where does that rank Clarkstown? One of the largest, I would assume?
one of the largest. There are some towns that are just huge. Out in Long Island, there's one that is over 100,000 parcels. But we're a large and very complicated assessment roll, just based on the homestead, non-homestead aspect of our roll. Mm-hmm. The commercial properties present a little different function in terms of how it interacts with the rest of the roll, mm-hmm. And how taxes actually get apportioned from one class to another.
Right.
So it's got a lot of complexities that you don't find in even larger towns that are just a straight assessment roll where there's no Homestead Act involved.
Right. So nobody likes paying taxes. I mean, nobody. But if somebody really wants to challenge their taxes, they can file a grievance. Can you just walk somebody through that process? And in the time we have left, maybe just talk about the resources that are available for folks
mm-hmm.
to be able to understand the process on our website.
Sure. So our website has what's called the Property Owner Toolkit, and it has all the information a homeowner or any property owner would need to review their assessment, including, start with the whole process. So there's the administrative review that starts with the assessor. Mm-hmm. So a taxpayer has the right, and we encourage it, for them to come in when they see an error on their assessment and say, I'd like to review this with you. And we're happy to do that. You can do that online by making a request. Just put in your address and so forth, and we'll take a look at it, and we'll actually do a review. And what we found this past year is quite a few of them got a reduction because it was warranted. Mm-hmm. After that period, we go to the Board of Assessment Review. So from May 1st to the fourth Tuesday in May, the taxpayer can file what's called an RP 524, which is also on our website, the link to that form. They can fill it out. They can put any sales data they have or information they have to prove that they're overassessed, and that will go to an independent body called the Board of Assessment Review. They're made up of 5 members of our community that have a solid knowledge of real estate and values, and they take a look at it. They're appointed to 5-year terms, and they're really good at looking at the information provided to establish whether a case is warranted or not, and make reductions from there. If you get denied at that level, then you can go, like we spoke of earlier, to the small claims assessment review or an Article 7, depending on what property type you have.
So that's about all the time that we have, but if you could give your contact information for our viewers, if they have any questions, they can get this information on our website. Going forward, it's fairly timely if folks have gone through the process, but it's always good to learn how your assessment has been derived, and there might be an opportunity for people to be able to save some money if they believe that their property doesn't have the value that it's been assessed for. So if you could give your contact and where people can get this information.
Sure. So you can look right on our website. You can go to Clarkstown, just go to the assessor's office. My email is j.noto@clarkstown.org. And my number in the office is 845-639-2031. And we encourage all taxpayers to come in and talk to us, because probably the biggest thing that taxpayers should know is that there's absolute transparency with their assessments. And if there's ever a question, there should never be the position of us against them. We're all in it together, and we're just trying to get that fairness and equity so that we pay our fair share of those taxes that nobody likes to pay.
Right. And I know that you've done a really great job of continuing in the tradition of Scott Shadler, of trying to educate people within the community, and you'll be going out to, continuing to go out to senior clubs to talk about how assessments are derived and resources that residents can be able to access to be able to help them understand their assessment and understand any of the assessment breaks that people are entitled to. If you're a veteran, if you're a senior citizen, if you're a first responder, there are a number of things that you can apply for that will help to reduce your assessment and help reduce your property tax burden. And if folks have questions about that, they can contact you as well, and also get the information off the website. But I want to thank you for being such a great guest, and I want to thank you for doing such a great job running our assessor's office, and I look forward to being in that position for very many years to come.
Thank you.
Please stay tuned for the end of our show.